Hello, my name is Khairani Barokka. You can call me Oka, and I am proud to be one of the co-conveners of this event, Disabled Legacies Beyond Access and Inclusion, at the Paul Mellon Center. My co-conveners are the wonderful Sria Chatterjee here in the front row, and Kenny Fries, who will be joining us via Zoom from Japan. So just a few housekeeping things to remind you. There is a quiet space next door where there's also a selection of books related to the theme, some of the speakers' books. Feel free to browse and feel free to move between spaces. There's an event information point in the social foyer just outside the space, and there will be a PMC staff member there at all times if you have any questions. PMC staff are wearing blue lanyards, so if you have any questions, please ask them. And the information pack includes eateries in the local area. You might find that helpful during lunch. Live captioning is available throughout, and if you want to view on your own device, please use the QR code in the event booklet. If you would like to ask a question, please wait for a microphone before speaking. This ensures your question is captured for captioning and can be heard by our online audience. And something new that we've made an executive decision on is please kindly respect this opportunity to learn more about the speaker's work and no comments rather than questions. Please have a question prepared for the speakers and take the opportunity to really delve into their work. Thank you so much. And we welcome questions from our online viewers as well. There are people viewing online. Please put your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom if you're viewing online, and they'll be passed on to colleagues in the room to read out. So a fully hybrid event like this has many tech challenges. So there are a few speakers joining us virtually today. So please bear with us because it may take a couple of minutes to switch between Zoom and the presentations on screen, but we'll keep things running as smoothly as possible. Thank you so much. And we're meeting here rather than at the Paul Mellon Center as it is a more accessible space. It does mean we're in a basement. We're figuring out the technical setup since it's not home turf, so thank you again for bearing with us. The PMC team have lugged our beloved air purifiers over thanks to Sria, so it should help keep the air fresh. Of course, feel free to wear masks as needed. The PMC is about 5 minutes away, and just to reiterate, there is a small and wonderful exhibition called Misfits, curated by Virginia Morano, and it's there to coincide with the program, so you can hop on over to PMC during the lunch break if you would like. Actually, is the center closed right now? Yes, okay, sorry, reading from yesterday's. The center is currently closed, but the exhibition, fabulous. Also, for image description, I'm an Indonesian woman with long black hair, and I'm wearing a multicolored blue Southeast Asian dress. And now we have a wonderful event chaired by Sria, presented by David Johnson.
We're all set and ready to go. So I'm going to introduce the speaker, David Johnson, who is a UK-based blind artist. He says he's unashamedly a blind artist rather than an artist who is blind. In his art, he uses a wide range of materials and processes, including concrete, plaster, found objects, and sonics. He produces a myriad of cast objects, 3D print objects, assemblages, and installations, all of which provoke, challenge, and upset beholder expectations. There's a lot more to say about his work, but I will let David do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, hi there, good morning. Could I just, first of all, say, I'm about to play something. I'd like you to listen to what's being played, and you'll hear a voice saying a whole series of zeros. But listen carefully as it proceeds, because you might hear those sounds shifting in your head. 0 Thank you. So on screen there's a screen full of zeros, and the screen reader JAWS, which is the screen reader I use every day on my computer, was reading the zeros out, and I hope you heard the word zero shifting to the word rosy. It's a piece called Rosie 1, and it's about how you can shift your perception of the world through your own mind and your own autonomy. Anyway, I'll come back to that later. So anyway, thank you very much indeed for inviting me here to speak. It's been such a wonderful experience over the last couple of days to be here, and I just want to thank the Paul Mellon Centre and all your staff for your hospitality and your kindness and your thoughtfulness. It's been such a wonderful experience. But here I am sitting again in a room full of people that I'm very unaware of, because I'm a totally blind person. And I don't know how many people are in this room at the moment, but I'm completely kind of oblivious to you. So what I'd like you to start off by doing is just shouting out hi or hello or good morning or I don't want to be here or there you. Oh my goodness, yeah. So that's a vastly different sound to what I was expecting. So there's quite a lot of you, aren't there? And you're spread fairly evenly around me, I think. And I'm also aware that there's quite a few people on screen online. And again, apparently you can't make yourselves known to me as a group because the technology hasn't allowed for that yet. But welcome to you all, and thank you so much for coming today. I guess I should start off by describing myself, as people do these days, which again is a weird thing for a totally blind person to do, because my visual presence is obscure to me, and again later on in this talk I'll talk about the objectification of a blind person's body. One of my pieces that I'm going to talk about is about that very subject. So to talk about myself as an object in front of you visually is a very odd thing to do. I'm aware that I'm a tall person. I identify as male. I'm white, I think. I'm an older man. I'm a late middle-aged person. My hair is white, I believe. I've been told it's now white. I'd like to think it's still colourful, but it's not. I've got a grey beard. And as to my clothing, yeah, I've got clothing on. Just to reassure you and myself. I've got clothing on. I'm wearing. I dress quite conventionally, I think, because I'm scared of. So, and I think I'm wearing a grey jump. My partner told me this morning I'm wearing a grey jumper. Correct me if I'm wrong, by the way. A grey jumper and grey trousers, and I've got a checked shirt on. I'm not sure what colour it is. Maybe no. Sorry. Green. Green check. Yeah. So there you go. And I've got black shoes on, I think. I mean, I know I've got shoes on, but I think they're black. So that's the visual outline. I remember going to a meeting a few years ago where everyone had to describe themselves. There were 20 people in the group. The meeting took an hour, and everyone described themselves just because I was there. And it took 45 minutes for people to describe themselves. There was only 10 minutes left at the end of the meeting for the content. So. Anyway, yeah, my introductory part of my talk must include the most amazing experiences I've had in recent years. I've recently acquired a PhD, which I finished last year, I studied at the Royal College of Art in London as an older student, and I had the most incredible experience there. I did a part-time PhD, and it was what they call practice-led. So my art practice was the sort of driving force behind the research, and I think of it as the methodology behind the research was my actual practice, was the making of art as a blind person in a very ocular-centric sort of environment. But having said that, the technical assistance that I received at the college and during my course was absolutely amazing. And so I had a wonderful time there. And the other thing that's been sort of quite life-changing for me in the last year is I was awarded the Adam Reynolds Award, which is administered by the SHAPE Disability Arts Organisation. And that's given me the opportunity, since finishing my PhD, to sort of develop my practice using the resources that award gives you. And soon there's a podcast coming out, which is sort of on the back of that. And I've been able to make lots of artworks using those resources. So that's my background, my recent background, and I won't bore you with the rest of it because it goes back a long way. But today, though, I'm going to talk about two subjects really. First of all, blindness itself as a phenomenon, as a sort of human condition, and secondly, I'm going to talk about my art practice. So I'm just going to ask for the first slide to be shown, please.
On screen is the title of the presentation, Beauty and the Blind.
So every slide I show today will have that audio connected to it, partly to help me know where I am and what's happening. So, and hopefully it may help other people in the room to understand what's on the screen if they can't see it or read it for whatever reason. So, yeah, blindness. What is it? A question that I'm asked a lot in life as I just walk around and go around in life is what is it like to be blind, to be totally blind? What is it actually like? Well, of course, the quick answer to that question is, well, it's not like anything really. I mean, it's very, very vaguely like being in the dark, I guess, or being blindfolded, but it's not really like that. I mean, my experience right now is not at all feeling as if I'm in the dark. I mean, I can't see what's out there, but it just doesn't feel like I'm blindfolded, or it doesn't feel like I'm blind, actually. It's just what it is. So that's what it's not like being blindfolded. It's not like being in the dark. The more interesting question, I think, is what is it to be blind? What is the experience of blindness? Well, the only way I can really sort of articulate that is to say that it's a series of experiences that, if you choose to think about it and analyze it, just presents you with a different range of sensory phenomena. The condition that I've got is known as retinitis pigmentosa, which is one of the commonest forms of blindness in younger people. Not that I'm a young person, but I've had it all my life. It's a hereditary condition. You're born with full sight, and then you very gradually lose vision over many years. And I'm a sort of textbook example of the retinitis pigmentosa. I had full vision as a child, and then it started sort of going in odd ways in my late childhood, and then through my teens, my night vision went first, and vision in dark or gloomy environments was the first thing that I noticed. And that's because the periphery of the retina is affected first by the condition. So your central vision is maintained. So my reading and my mobility was not affected initially, but my night vision was. And then gradually, throughout my teens, it got worse, or the condition became more prominent in my life. And in my 20s, reading text became harder and harder. And then towards the end of my 20s, mobility started to be challenged as well. So I started to use a white cane in that phase. And it was then that I realized that I was joining this club called Blind People, and I had to start learning to sort of be blind, as it were, and to take on the trappings that of blindness that are available. Things like Braille, things like using a white guide cane to help with one's mobility, and that took a long time to assimilate, as I'm sure other blind people will affirm. It's a long learning process, which I'm still going through, you know. I better show you another slide. If I could have the next slide, please.
On screen are the words, blindness does not enforce an absence of vision, but makes tangible the limits of visual cognition and calls to attention the plurality of perspectives and refracted observations, the conspiracy of visual stability, the pervasiveness of 2020 conformity. Blindness offers a radicality. Finally, by Khairani Evie.
Those wonderful words by a scholar, she's an Australian scholar and artist, Khairani Evie. I find those inspirational because the opening sentence, blindness does not enforce an absence of vision. Well, that's so powerful to me because, and it's so true that even though you stop being able to sort of see light, vision is far more than just seeing light or not seeing light in the case of blindness. Vision is as much in the mind as it is in the body, and a lot of the art that I make tries to articulate that, maybe not obviously, but I'm very, very keen that my art has a visual presence as well, as a tactile or auditory presence. That is because the visual world is still very important part of my experiential day-to-day life. I still think very visually. I still have a strong sense of colour. I'm very keen to know what colour my artwork is, and I'm keen to, as much as I can, to control the visual outcome of my artwork. So I nearly always work with people, and my assistants are often engaged in conversation with me about the colour or the visual elements within the piece, whatever it may be. So when one starts to think about blindness in the way that I've just been trying to say, I think the next question that comes very clearly and quickly to mind is, well, if blindness still includes visual experience or vision in the sense of a mental visual experience, then what is vision? You know, what is healthy eyesight? If I could have the next slide, please.
On screen are the words, the relation between what we see and what we know is never settled, by John Berger.
So many of you may have heard and read John Berger's work. His sort of seminal piece was written back, a book was written back in the 80s, Ways of Seeing. And this inspirational phrase, you know, the relationship between what we see and what we know is never settled. says it all, really. It says that what we experience in the world through our senses, whether it's sight or touch or whatever, is provisional. It's not fixed. It doesn't tell us what's out there. It just gives us clues. It just gives us a hint of what's out there. So vision, healthy vision, although it's obviously what we all would like and aspire to, because it's so full of beauty and so full of wonderful things to see, they're provisional. They're not fixed, they're not given. So armed with that knowledge, my artwork is still very much about the visual world as much as it is about the blind experience. So, yeah, the day-to-day life of being a blind person is, as I said earlier, a series of experiences that if you choose to dwell on them and think about them, art becomes a very forceful way, I think, of expressing what it's like. And one of the things I do is as I go around, I try and think about what's happening around me, and I've sort of divided up into categories that can be easily thought about, so that there's the internal experience, like being in a room such as this room. What is this telling me? What is the experience as a blind person of being in this room? Well, earlier I asked you all to sort of call out, and that's one of the experiences. That gives me the sound that you all made, gave me a clue of who was in the room, where you are in the room in relation to me. It gave me some sort of idea of the size of the room because of the acoustics of the room that I could pick up through my hearing, although my hearing is now going a little bit as well, so that's getting altered a bit as well, but that's just age creeping up. But nevertheless, it's those internal acoustics of a room like this are very powerful ways of telling you about the space you're in as a blind person. Another very common sort of a common experience environment is being outside in the urban world. So being in a place like London, you walk around and you're feeling the pavement under your feet, you're hearing the sound of the traffic, you're hearing a whole wealth of sounds and experiences that, again, is very rich source of experience to dwell on as an artist, and to use those experiences to inform one's art. Another environment I love to place myself in as a blind person is the rural world of the countryside, where the built environment is not so present. So my own studio is in a very rural place, and I love just walking around with my assistant in around the studio, just experiencing the relative silence or the different range of sounds and tactile experiences and smells that the rural world offers. And again, a number of my artworks have used those experiences as part of what they are. So let's start looking at my artwork. So if I could just offer you the next slide, please.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled Inhibition,
That's it.
Beyond the Doubt of a Shadow.
Inhibition, Beyond the Doubt of a Shadow. This is a piece which I made in quite a while ago now, 2019, I think, yeah. And what it is, it's a series of silicon facsimiles of discarded chewing gum. So as I went around, as we all know, as you go around the urban environment, if you sit down or place yourself at a table or a chair, before very long you're aware that there's discarded chewing gum under the table or the chair, which is, not very pleasant and can be a bit dirty, but it struck me as being an interesting phenomenon, and because it it showed me that that the shadow of underneath a table isn't such an off-putting place. In fact, the shadow doesn't really exist in my experience now. Shadows and light are not things that are things I can experience. So this is why I've subtitled this piece Beyond the Doubt of a Shadow, just playing with the usual term, beyond the shadow of a doubt. So I stuck these silicon bits of pretend chewing gum under a table, and at the moment this piece is being exhibited at the Henry Moore Institute up in Leeds as part of the Beyond the Visual show. And what presented there, it's just a table and 4 stools that look perfectly innocent until you sit at them. And then if you place your hand under the table, you can feel a whole array of these silicon chewing gum pieces. And they actually, if you choose to sort of feel them carefully and get out your Braille primer, they say in Braille the word inhibition. Because it's an inhibited piece. It's not an exhibited piece. It's under the table, out of sight, only available to touch. And I'm going to hand around a few examples of the chewing gum pieces, if I can find them in front of me. There's a little bag of...
I've got them, David, and Ella is just going to
if you could just hand them round, yeah. Just feel them. They've got a flat back to them, which of course that's the side that's stuck.
one person each.
No, just pass them around. There's a few of them, so you can just pass them on and handle them and feel the realistic portrayal of discarded chewing gum. But reassured, they've never been in anyone's mouth, and they're made of silicon. So the piece is about thinking beyond shadows and thinking beyond light and thinking about touch rather than sight. What they've done in the show, actually, up in Leeds, where they're being exhibited, where they're being inhibited, is they've sprayed it with spearmint oil, so they actually smell of chewing gum as well as feel like chewing gum, which was quite a nice touch. So enjoy them and pass them around, please. So if I could ask for the next slide, please, guys.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled Braillescape.
That's it, thank you. So Braillescape is a piece which I don't know whether you can see on screen. It's an oblong, I think, maybe quite square-shaped piece of porcelain, which I cast with a lot of help, I have to say. And it portrays a Braille sheet of paper. And this is a shopping list. And it's very simply a piece of paper that had been in my pocket for a very long time because I'd done the shopping and forgotten to take the list out of my pocket. And after time, the Braille of the shopping list, which is simply a pound of, just a series of items on a shopping list, a pint of milk and a packet of biscuits and a jar of coffee, and all written in Braille so that I didn't forget what I went to the shops for. But the paper became very folded and very creased. And I was quite interested in the way that the Braille was starting to disappear. I don't know whether you can see that visually, but the Braille gets sort of mixed up with the creases and folds of the paper, and the actual meaning of the Braille disappears. And it becomes, I think, quite an interesting tactile experience to sort of feel this piece. Unfortunately, I haven't brought it with me, but hopefully people who can see the screen can see the top, what I call the topology or the landscape of the piece of paper, which includes the Braille. So I was just quite interested in the way the Braille and the creases were becoming one, and the meaning of the words, Braille words, was beginning to fade away back into the paper from whence they came. And I quite like that sort of transience. I'll talk about transience more later, but I quite like the transience of Braille. It can be annoying if you're trying to read a book that's very, read some text that's very worn. If I could have the next slide, please.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled Too Big to Feel.
So this is quite an old piece now. On screen, I think you can see some very bright white sort of dots, which are Braille dots, but they're huge. This is a piece which is far too big. It's massive. When I showed it on the photograph is of a showing of it, and it took up, I think, 40 or so square meters because it was laid out on a bank. This is in front of the Royal Holloway College buildings, and each of the Braille dots, they're normally about a fraction of a millimeter in size, these are nearly a meter. They average about 75 centimeters in diameter. So when they're laid out as Braille, there's no way you can understand what the words are by feel, because they're just too big. And Too Big to Feel, the title was a play on the phrase that was going around at the time. Too big to fail was the banking in the banking crisis back in the early part of the noughties. So it was a play on that phrase, too big to feel. But the words that I've written in Braille here are seeing red. The two words seeing red, but written in grade 2 Braille. And grade 2 Braille is where you use contractions to minimize the amount of dots that you need. So it's a bit like a shorthand. So for instance, in the word seeing, the first word, you've got the letter S followed by the letter E, followed by the second letter E, and then the ing of seeing is written as one symbol involving 3 dots. So it shortens the word seeing. And then one of the dots towards the end of the piece in the word red is actually red in colour. They're all the dots are white apart from this one dot towards the end, which is red. And I just enjoyed the visual possibility of having that red dot sitting amongst all the white dots, hopefully on a green bank. So I just enjoy the colour impact, hopefully, of those 3 colours working together, which of course they're not available to blind people at all, but with audio description, those colours would become available, and audio description is a very important part of my life and part of my practice for that very reason. If I could have the next...
On screen is a photograph of the table used to make the piece Too Big to Feel.
Oh yeah, so I included this because I quite like the table itself that we used to make the individual large concrete dots for the piece Too Big to Feel. And what I did is I got a sheet of plywood and cut a hole in it, 1 meter in diameter, and then placed nails around the circumference of the hole on the wood, obviously. And then I hung a sheet of polythene across the hole attached to all these nails, and it became a hammock. And I then poured the wet concrete into the polythene hammock, and the weight of the concrete weighed down on the polythene, stretched the polythene, so it slumped and it didn't collapse. It held the weight, and then the concrete dried in this bowl-shaped polythene hammock. And then when the concrete had dried, I took the concrete out and reversed it, so it became this beautiful dome-shaped object. And what it also had was the creases of the polythene, as it had been stretched by the weight of the concrete, it produced these wonderful what can only be called stretch marks in the concrete, which were recorded very faithfully by the concrete and very dramatically, actually. So this reversed object became this rather beautiful dome-shaped thing, which, when placed on the grass, it looked as if it was sort of growing out of the ground. It was like a sort of fungal, felt and hopefully looked like a sort of fungal growth. So I quite enjoyed that unexpected outcome, tactile and visual outcome from this process. So this is a photograph of that table, which is still with me. When I showed this piece again in public, in a much more public arena, it became a sort of used by the local art lovers in the evenings. Kids would. It was shown in a park, in a public park, and kids would pick up the pieces and sort of roll them around, and eventually it got broken, and had to be sort of cleared up and just sort of put in a skip. So it no longer exists, thanks to the local art lovers in my local community. But it could live again because of this. I still have the table to make it with. So if I could have the next slide, please.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled Sanctuary Cafe.
Okay, thank you. So I'm running out of time, I believe. Right, so I better hurry along. So the public domain is what this next slide is about. Oops, sorry. So, yeah, but being blind in the public domain has a whole host of interesting experiences that I can use for my art. And this piece is an example of a public art piece which really dwells on that public domain. Sanctuary Cafe was a piece commissioned by the Liberty Arts Festival movement, which is the London Disability Arts program, and it is a 3D print of a real person, a life-size 3D print. And the person depicted in the sculpture or installation is a local person to Lewisham, where this piece currently resides. She's a lady called Stella Headley, and she's a local community worker, very well-known figure in the local community, a much-loved person. And the thinking behind this piece was to celebrate local, I suppose what might call local heroes. Rather, it was at the time of Black Lives Matter, when so many awful things were happening and statues were being ripped off their plinths. So this was about making an installation that didn't involve a plinth and didn't involve a sort of a national celebrity. It was about celebrating local, well-known people. And the people, and this piece invites the public to sit with Stella at the table, eat and drink with her, because she's depicted eating and drinking. And you can sit with her and just chat with your friends and with her if you want to. She's not very talkative, but yeah. And it's about getting the sculptures off the plinth and getting them down to the level of the visitor. And I better go on to the next slide, please.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled Transient Objects Caught in a Multi-Dimensional Moment of Impossible Pringles.
A snappy title. This is about touch. And as a blind person, touch becomes an interesting phenomenon because it just brings to mind what touch is really about. What is happening? Is touch, when you touch something, is it of your skin or is it of the object? Well, it's of neither and it's of both. And I just want to hand around a couple of pieces which are transient objects. It's the transience of touch that I'm interested in. So can I just ask someone to hand these pieces around, can I give them to, there's two of them. And they are very familiar objects, but put in a very unfamiliar context. They're 3D printed, they use resin, and they try and isolate the points of touch where the fingers or the hand are light upon the object, and isolating those points only and leaving the object itself less clearly delineated. The object is implied by the points of touch, which I'm fascinated by that. So hopefully you'll, as they go around, you can place your fingers and hands on the points of touch and maybe experience the object through touch alone, if you can. I'll just, while those are going around, I'll move on to the next slide.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled "Blind I Stand Before the Mirror" that evokes an image of thought of self whose tessellating and fragmentary modes of sensing are both the instrument and the object of reflection.
Another snappy title. This is about mirrors, and as you can see from the, hopefully see from the photograph, it's a series of 5 oval-shaped objects that are hanging on the wall. 2 of them are actual mirrors where you can see yourself, if you can see yourself in the mirror, you become part of the artwork. 2 of them are photographs of myself in the mirror, and the central object is of a blank oval shape. All 5 of the objects are cut into jigsaw puzzle shapes so that the images are fragmented and altered to make the point about altered reflection and altered image and altered identity, really. And the middle blank jigsaw puzzle has no image at all. This is just unfinished wood. And I like the idea of a jigsaw puzzle that has no picture on it. You can do jigsaw puzzles just by touch. And the next slide, please.
On screen is a photograph of the piece titled "I as Object Unseen."
This piece is about what I was talking about earlier in trying to describe myself. It's about objectifying yourself. As a blind person, as a totally blind person, I haven't been able to see myself in a mirror or in a photograph for about 30, 35 years. So to objectify myself is a really difficult and odd thing to do. But this piece does it. They're 3D printed figurines of myself. They stand about around about a foot high, 30 centimeters high, and they're very faithful representations of me walking through a space with my white cane, walking towards a chair with a hat on it, and then I sit on the chair. There's a print of me sitting on the chair, wearing the hat, my cane held across my body, not being used. And then the third episode of this 3-part trivial story is of me walking away from the chair. The hat is back on the chair, and I'm walking, as it were, out of the frame. It was just quite a moving experience to feel these figures that are facsimiles of me, and to feel the detail of my body and what I feel like after all those years of not being aware of it, not being aware of it, but not being able to experience it. So this was a fascinating bit of egocentricity, I suppose, really. This is all about me. But it's also all about blindness, actually. I hope other blind people would see what I'm getting at with this. I'm sorry, I better hurry along. The next slide, please.
For everything I have ever heard. Every wood pigeon cooing out a beat whilst I fell asleep on my birthday. I remember every wedding band I have ever heard on the banister, followed by a slippered foot cooing out a beat whilst I fell asleep on my birthday. Stylus scrape, every wedding band. If I was a witch's house, I remember everything. Followed by a tap like a voice after too much. Every wood pigeon, every D90. I can still hear the water in my ears plugging. If I was a witch's hat, and every wedding band. I remember every voice I have ever heard. I remember every fleeting sound. I can still hear the water of my heart. Every D90 whilst I fell asleep. Stylus scrape, a rhythm. If I was a witch's hat, my entire remember every voice oscillated from down to the side of my heart. I can still hear the D90 whilst I fell asleep. It's like my entire every wedding band. I remember oscillates from down to every fleeting sound from down to the pound. I can still hear the D90 whilst I fell asleep. And if I was let my entire wedding band as a tone on the other side, it oscillates from fleeting sound down to the pound. I can still hear the water D90 whilst I fell asleep. It's like my entire wedding band drip, drip, that oscillates from every fleeting sound down to the round of my heart. I can still hear the water D90 as plugging styles unplugging. It's like my entire life is a tone, drip, drip, that oscillates from every fleeting sound down to the round of my heart. I can still hear the water in my ears plugging, unplugging. It's like my entire life is a tone that oscillates from every fleeting sound down to the pound of my heart, dark in my mouth, in a burgled house. It's like my entire life is a tone that oscillates from dark to light, from light to dark.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. We have time for questions, and I see a hand right here.
Hiya.
Hello.
I've got a question, please, about your. I thought they said they were a foot high. The guys who were with the hats walking away back and forth from the chair.
Yeah.
They're a foot high. Why were they so small? And I'm cane trained, and I have to say that the thing that I found the most about the cane is the movement of the cane as you sweep across the pavement. The movement of that feeling of movement in your body as you move it across, and the sound as you go across the pavement. And it seems to be lots of the picture there. People look at blindness from the outside; they see this thing here, but it's not like. For me, from the inside, it was much more about movement and the sound, and not being a foot high. I'm bigger than a foot high.
So sorry. You think of it as more about movement,
Yeah.
than.
But why a foot high is my real mega question. And
Sorry, what was that last?
Why a foot high? You said a foot high. Makes you really small, and you're not a small person.
No. Okay, yeah. The size of the pieces was, partly actually was constrained by the 3D print technology, but there's also an element of I wanted them small enough, rather than too big to feel. I wanted them small enough to feel. So if they were too big, then you lose control of the overall. As a blind person, anyway, of the overall shape. You know, there's the famous story of the 6 blind men and the elephant, where each person thinks an elephant is each of the blind people thinks that the elephant is what they can feel, which is just a bit of the elephant. So I wanted to keep them small enough to understand the whole body, easily. But and I'm interested in your comment about movement. I much agree with the sense of movement. But yeah, that's why it was a sort of triptych. It was in 3 parts where there was a sort of transience within it, but also a sort of static. Each part was static. But yeah, thank you for those observations. Yeah.
Do you find that, like, with 3D printing, it accurately represents like the sort of sensory or the experience of like interacting with the object that you're trying to build? So like whether the like layer lines or material constraints or science constraints like affect that, or if that's something that you like intentionally want to include in the models.
The accuracy, it's staggering. I found when I first started using 3D printing, the fidelity really with which it copied the world was I found it very breathtaking, and it was like I should imagine people felt when photography, traditional photography, first came along back in the early part of the 19th century. There's the staggering clarity and fidelity with which technology copied the world must have been breathtaking. And I've found the same sense of awe and wonder at how 3D print, through the similar photographic, because you're scanning objects, aren't you, with a photographic process, and then through this thing called photogrammetry, I think, where you translate the data, the photographic data, into a three-dimensional set of into three-dimensional data, and then translated in for the printer to print it off. But yes, it was simple. It was just that clarity, that fidelity. I used to, when I could see as a child and a teenager, I was a painter, and I loved figurative painting and drawing. I loved trying to copy. I loved simply trying to copy the world, and the joy of doing that sort of came back to me a little bit with 3D printing. So it is just that really that I enjoy. Clearly, it isn't the real world, and it's not like the real world because it's plastic or it's resin or whatever the material is. So it's very unlike the object. You know what I've handed round. I don't know whether you've picked up what those objects are, but one of them's a pear, and one of them's a coffee cup or a mug. So, and they're clearly nothing like a coffee mug and a pear. So that bit of 3D printing doesn't try and what they try and do is faithfully copy or represent what it's like to touch something. So it's got that double edge to it.
David, I'm going to take the liberty of saying something since I have a microphone here.
Yeah.
And just to say that I was so struck, I had a couple of aha moments while you were talking, and I was struck by the fact that you started with the provisionality of vision, of 2020 vision,
Yeah.
and, the fact that healthy vision isn't really all-seeing at all, and that is provisional.
Yeah.
And how in your work, in some sense, you sort of, I think you say something like your art is as much of blindness as it is about blindness.
Yeah.
But then even with the 3D objects and a lot of the other works, it's also about seeing and the provisionality of seeing, right?
Absolutely.
Which I think is really kind of helpful to think with, because I think a lot of the work is, as you were saying, experience of blindness and experience, especially with the 3D prints, you're saying that you hope that it is helpful to, it's a familiar thing for other blind artists and people. But I think it really does also completely change the way you think about seeing, as much as it changes, kind of thinks about blindness. So
Absolutely. When I was doing my research, that came to the fore quite strongly, and my supervisor was quite keen from the very early on to say this is as much about what we see as about blindness. Yeah. And I isolated this idea of it's called anamnesis. It's one of the chapters in my thesis. It's called anamnesis, which is basically an inherent ability to see. So we're born ready to see, whether we can or not is another matter. There might be something wrong with our eyes or our brain which prevents us from seeing, but we're nevertheless ready to see the body like it's ready to do so many things, you know, walk and talk and smell and procreate. You know, our bodies are predetermined to do these things. Whether or not we can is another matter. So to that extent, vision is with us. If our bodies are reasonably healthy and our brains are reasonably healthy, then vision is very much still with us.
Well, this is really helpful. We have one question in the room and another one, very technical question from an online audience member, and I'm going to ask it because sometimes technical questions are quite fun. They asked, do you use the TCS 3200 Arduino, I might be pronouncing it wrong, color sensor? I haven't used it, but I'm wondering if it's useful. This is from a J. Jean Gristock.
Oh, yeah. This is a colour sensing technology.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah. I guess I might have done without... various people have brought up the possibility of machines telling you what colours are in that way, if that's what you're talking about. Actually, I'm not sure of the usefulness of that because, I mean, it tells you about frequency, I think, and spectra, you know, where the colour sits on the spectrum, etc. I find it far more useful to listen to somebody audio describing a colour, using language to try and articulate the effect that a colour is having on them, emotional or experiential effect it's having on them as a fellow human being. I'd much rather listen to a poet or a clever audio describe a colour to get across to me what they are experiencing of the colour. A machine will tell you about frequency, about, you know, light intensity, tonal intensity maybe, but it won't tell you anything about the emotional or the experiential effect of colour, which that's all I want to know about colour. I want to know that red, what effect that red is having on you, on my fellow human beings. I'm not interested on what effect it's having on a machine, really.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's really helpful. It actually takes me back to, I think some of you were in the room in February when members of Quiplash were talking about audio description and kind of showing some of their work as well. So it's quite nice for us to think across the programs. Tony, did you have a question?
Hi, David. It's Tony Heaton. You provoked me by describing the room full of people who were telling you what they looked like, and 45 minutes of the hour-long meeting disappeared. I've been in a similar circumstance, and I thought I'll just say, for the blind person in the room, what do you want to know about me?
Yeah.
And nobody said anything. There wasn't a blind person in the room or anybody with a visual impairment who needed any of that information. So the entire room had spent 45 minutes, an hour-long meeting describing themselves to each other, which seemed completely unnecessary. And I asked a few blind friends about this. How do you feel? And almost all of them said, I feel slightly embarrassed by it. It feels like a middle-class conceit by an arty-farty audience, and it's not really much use to me, except for one person who said, well, I think it's okay. So I really just wanted to know, for you to tell us, you know, about that experience. And my rider is access. I'm a wheelchair user, as you know. Access is vitally important for us all to consider, for all of us. But I just wanted your view on that after you said that.
What do I personally want to know about what other people look like? Is that the question?
I do need the microphone for the thing. I'm just curious as to what information is useful before people tell you about their designer footwear or their trendy haircut or the jewellery that they got in, wherever it was.
To be brutally honest, I I'm not that interested. I really, yeah. I mean, it's only because it's. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like the thought of nice clothing and nice, what people look like. If you know, but that's kind of different. I'm not really bothered if I'm in a meeting or anyway, really. Not terribly interested in what other people look like, actually. Even though I've said, maybe that contradicts what I said earlier about being a very visual person. But no, it's just a sort of thing that's happened in recent years, which I suppose if it sort of ticks some boxes about inclusivity, if there are people, visually impaired people who want to know that, then fair enough, But personally, if it never happened, that would be fine. Sorry if that deflates.
I just thought I wanted your observation, because the observation I get from other blind people is that they sort of feel a bit like
embarrassed.
Yeah, and it's a relative, as you say, it's a relatively modern thing.
Yeah.
Nobody seemed to know where it came from.
No.
And they kind of went along with it because it seemed a polite thing to do.
Because it seems quite kind of right in a way, morally, ethically sound and inclusive and all the rest of it. But I mean,
what I said to them is just say, I don't really to know what you look like.
Yeah.
I'm not really that interested. Don't waste half the meeting telling me.
Yeah.
I don't want to appear rude, but...
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, some meetings I've been to, the presenter has said, if you want to, you can describe yourself, which maybe is more sort of even-handed. But the other thing that strikes me is that blind people aren't a homogenous group. Blind people, like any other group of people, whether it's Arsenal supporters or anything, they are mixed and complex. You can't really generalise about what blind people want or don't want, because they're all different, annoyingly. It would be nice if they did conform to some kind of homogenous thing, but they don't. You get as many views on things as there are blind people. So I can't speak for other blind people. I can only speak for myself. Unfortunately, where I went to most of these meetings was at college recently, where there were very few visually impaired people. Hardly. I was usually the only one. So, yeah.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm aware that we're
dialogue.
I'm aware that we're out of time, but I know that we will have time across the day to talk individually to David, and just to kind of acknowledge that we have a couple of really wonderful comments from the online audience, which I will be sure to pass on to David.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And so, thanks again, and we will be back soon. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.